Good evening, everyone. Again, Steve here at my brother's place here in Terrace, BC. I just wanted to let you know that I had the great fortune of being able to stop by my old stomp of Saskatoon. Not that old, really. Haven't been away there very long, from there very long. My friend Rick was a very great host when I was there, and he also put on a coffee chat, which was wonderful. I got to meet many of my friends from there. The topic was on relationships. A very important discussion, of course. I hadn't prepared anything, and I didn't really take any notes because I didn't even have a notebook with me except a little wee piece of very small notebook, and I jotted a few things down I didn't really have them with me right now. I'd have to dig them out somewhere. I do remember a few comments, though, that I wanted to share, which I thought were really, really important. For the simple reason that I've been learning a lot lately from my son's encouragement for me to read a book called Real-Time Relationships by a gentleman by the name of Stefan Molyneux from Toronto, near Toronto. And that's also my son's prompting has encouraged me to look into a lot of his philosophy, which is really great. I mean, he's part of what I would call the freedom movement, overall idea of the freedom movement. And a lot of people have a different take on this. There's all kinds of takes on the freedom movement. There is anything from chemtrails to libertarianism to anarcho-capitalism to atheism to all kinds of different isms on that spectrum. His focus is on where, freedom is kind of the opposite of violence. When we have violence, we have curtailment of freedom because we're violated from our natural tendency to want to be free. And everybody's got their own take on it as to how to approach this. His approach is very unique, and I think it's so close to truth. It's absolutely profound what this man is teaching, I think. Because if my understanding is correct, what he's basically saying is that we learn as human beings how to live in a society by the way we're raised. Just like the way we learn a language. We don't actually go to school to learn English, or to learn, people who are in Japan, they don't go to school to learn Japanese. They learn that because they're in their culture. And my take on this, from what I've been learning from him, is that we are like, the human being is like liquid, almost. Which liquid takes the shape of the container into which it's poured. And a baby that comes into the world, the character of that baby, its language, its mannerisms, the way it behaves, the way it interacts, and the way it interacts through relationships, because everything is relating, takes the shape of the culture into which it's poured. And the culture, the immediate culture of the vast majority of children in all of civilization, all of history, has been through the main relationship experience is the parent-child relationship. So his point being that in order to improve society, which is improving relationships really, because society is just an amalgam of relationships, that's all it is, right? In order to improve that, we have to improve the parent-child relationship. Which, this is quite logical to follow. It makes perfect sense. He makes the case, Stefan does at times, that it's no surprise that a Japanese kid doesn't just spontaneously start speaking English. No, it speaks the language of Japanese, because that's what the culture in which it's born into. Likewise, in all other forms of relationships, in terms of violence. If children see violence, experience violence, then they end up behaving that way, as an example. If their relationships in the family structure are dysfunctional, more than likely their relationships will be dysfunctional, because that's the language of relationship that they've learned. Now, for those of us, myself included, who have experienced levels of dysfunction growing up in relationship with family, recognizing that this has taken place, in the recognition of that, dissolves us of, or absolves us, you might say, or we realize that we have no excuses to behave that way, because we're recognizing that we're just repeating a pattern. But we can work on ourselves through an exercise of developing self-knowledge, recognizing how we were programmed because of our cultural histories. And if those cultural histories are not serving us anymore, we can make the effort through things like self-study, self-help, counseling, and practicing within ourselves in the same way that we can learn a new language. We can also learn how to improve ourselves in our relationships, because it's really like a new language. If we're behaving a certain way over here in a relationship, and we want to behave this way, then we have to practice that. I mean, if each and every one of us doesn't speak Japanese, we have to learn about Japanese and then practice Japanese. The same thing if we watch somebody playing a musical instrument. Just because we watched it, we can learn, but we have to practice it, what we learned, before it becomes natural to us. So it's many years and many. I mean, let's face it. If we're culturalized or cultured in a certain way for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the way we are becomes habitual. I mean, we don't have to think about how to speak. We don't have to think about how to walk. But there was a time when that was a struggle for us. So when we embark on something new, a new language of relationships, of empathy in relationships, of understanding, of emotions, and all of these things that are important in relationships, when we embark on that and it is unfamiliar to us, we have to work on it. We have to get instruction. Maybe it's through counseling. Maybe it's through reading certain books. Maybe it's through subscribing to some of the things that Stefan Molyneux teaches, or whoever it is that resonates with us, listening to some of the things they say, implementing them into our lives, sharing them with those who are close to us, and trying to develop some sort of an agreement of help from people. And in some cases, where relationships are completely dysfunctional and harmful to us, putting those relationships on hold until such time, indefinitely, or at least until such time as we can actually get control of ourselves. I mean, there are toxic relations after a while. If we know that somebody is physically ill to the point where they're contagious, we don't want to go spend time with them. Somebody has the bubonic plague, let's say hypothetically, even though we might care for them and want the best for them, we're better off not hanging out with them. It's the same way with somebody is toxic in a relationship. We might wish the best for them, have all the greatest will for them, and the best wishes for them. But if we realize that it's toxic for our growth, then in some cases it's best that we do extract ourselves. We don't do this with our dependent children, obviously, because, but I'm talking the adult relationships, because dependent children are, for the most part, innocent, at least if they're young enough not to be able to reason and so on, or not to be able to completely reason, not fully developed. I wanted to share that anyway because it was about relationships, and I thought it was because I didn't have any input on the topic. He just sprung it on us, and I thought it was really great because I just read that book, Real-Time Relationships. I highly recommend it as an introduction to Stefan's philosophy on this and the importance of peaceful parenting, what he calls it. That is, he feels that is the next human evolution sort of way. Almost probably even more powerful than the concept of getting rid of slavery, or equal anyway. There was a time, remember, when slavery was considered acceptable. Not only that, it was considered necessary. Not only that, if you suggested at one time several hundred years ago that we should probably get rid of slavery, you were looked at as a complete nutter. In the same way that very often if you talk about peaceful parenting today, some people look at you as a complete nutter, and they'll justify violence against children in the name of discipline. There will come a time when that will be, we'll think back at that as though we were completely savages, really. That we would actually hit children and call it discipline, when the only discipline, after all, means to teach. Well, if we use violence, that's teaching children violence. And though the excuse a lot of people like to use is, well, I was hit and I'm okay. Well, that may very well be true. I mean, people are very resilient. There's people who smoke till they're 90 years old too, but the science is on board that smoking is generally bad for you. And the science is also unanimously on board that hitting children is not helpful, it is harmful, and all sorts of other violence. But I think it's very interesting to take a look at that. The book is available for free download, and I highly recommend you go have a look at it. You can just type in Stefan Molyneux, and it's Molyneux, it's Molyneaux. It's a French name, that's the last name. First name is Stefan, Stefan Molyneux. His website is freedomainradio.com. And then if you put /free, you'll get his books, and it's a PDF, you can download it, it's an easy read. I highly recommend it. Real-Time Relationships by Stefan Molyneux. If you read it, I'm pretty sure, if you take some of it to heart, your relationships will certainly improve. In some cases, you may find yourself, well, I'll leave it up to you. You may find yourself realizing that certain relationships are, shall I say, best off left behind. Because as the old saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. So if you're flocking with a crowd that is not helpful, you may find that that crowd will get left behind. But it is important that we support the direction we're going, and our relationships are so key to that. Just wanted to share this. Thanks once again, everybody, for seeing you in Saskatoon, and I hope to see you out there again. All the best. Bye-bye for now.